Hey folks, just got done with my round 7 game here at the US Open in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And yeah, this was a pretty sharp game. I was playing black against Josh Harrison, 2166 USCF. And the game started with e4, c5. He played d4, Smith-Morra Gambit. I took this one, c3. And yeah, here I usually just play knight f6 because I'm not interested in going into the sharp gambit lines, and here I don't think white has much better than to just play e5, where after knight d5 we're transposing back into a c3 Sicilian, which is already just part of my normal repertoire. So I've always felt like this is just a very practical approach for black, because I'm willing to play this opening anyway if white starts with 2c3. So knight f3 e6, we end up getting a pretty typical line for this variation. And here the main move is bishop c4, but my opponent played a3. And the idea behind this move is that it covers the b4 square and sets up bishop d3 next from white, where they really actually want to put their bishop in this structure. Because if they start with bishop d3, black has this nice idea with takes, and knight b4. Otherwise, white would be doing well. But here black is hitting the bishop and also wanting to trade queens. So white has to go like bishop b5 check, bishop d7. And I think black gets a very reasonable position here. The bishop can come out and knight comes out as well. So a3. And I went with the kind of typical route here. Bishop d7, bishop c6. Putting the bishop on a really nice diagonal and then making way for knight d7. Bishop d3, bishop c6, castles, knight d7, queen e2, and I played bishop to e7. And so far this is all pretty typical. Black is still wanting to play like rook c8 and maybe a6 and possibly queen c7. At some point take on e5, forcing de, and then maybe playing like knight c5, playing against the bishop on c2. I believe the main move here for white is bishop to d2, and yeah, it's definitely a complicated position. White has more space, but black has a nice square on d5. And in general, I think black is doing fine here, but certainly not super easy to play. But black has a lot of moves and different ways to continue from here. My opponent played h3, which I definitely never seen before in this structure. But I don't have a ton of experience here, so I wasn't exactly sure whether this move was some kind of new idea or preparation or just a random try. It was hard to say. It was played pretty quickly at the board, so yeah, I couldn't quite figure it out if this was over the board inspiration or some kind of known plan. So I spent some time. I played rook to c8, which I feel like is a natural move. White went b4, which is also pretty thematic, burning b5, trapping the bishop, so I played a6. And yeah, here I was mainly expecting bishop d2 again, defending the pawn, maybe looking to play a4 in the future. And I was thinking about moves like b5, and yeah, I thought black would be okay here. I get to carve out some space on the queen side. Thought maybe a4, queen b6, for example. And I wasn't totally sure, but I thought black is doing all right here. But then my opponent really surprised me with g4. And yeah, g4 is definitely a super provocative move. I mean, when he played h3, I can't say I really saw it coming. I thought this might be connected with like knight h2 or something. I wasn't totally sure. So I can't say I was totally shocked with g4, but yeah, it was definitely very surprising, especially because white weakens this diagonal, and immediately it feels like black already has something. So here I kind of lost my mind a little bit. I got super obsessed with this idea to take on e5 and play knight to c3, which is kind of a thematic trick in these positions. So I thought now it really made sense now that white's played g4 and weakened the whole king side. So I started calculating this line of takes, knight c3, with the idea of playing bishop takes f3, and then after queen takes f3, not here, which would win back the piece, but actually knight takes e5. And my idea is that, okay, I'm getting the very important pawn on e5, and now I either want to take on d3 or play rook takes c3 and hit everything on the third rank. And so, yeah, a couple lines here. I mainly expected queen takes b7, which is what ended up happening in the game. But if queen e4, or some move like this, then my idea was to go queen takes d3, and this looked like it was working out nicely for black. Takes, takes, and if white goes for the endgame, rook takes c3, h3 is now hanging, black is up a pawn, and I thought, yeah, it has a big advantage. So queen takes b7 was kind of the critical line, and yeah, my first thought was to take on d3 here, but from afar I didn't quite like the looks of knight e4. I wasn't sure how to evaluate this position here because we're kind of underdeveloped. Rook to d1 is definitely in the air. So I wasn't quite sure what to make of this position. So my idea was actually to go rook takes c3 and hit the bishop on d3, of course, but also hit the pawn on h3. And I thought this is actually quite interesting, but it turns out to be super unclear. In fact, maybe even bad for black. So going back to this position after g4, there's really a lot of ways for black to punish this without going crazy. So one idea, for instance, was to just play takes, and knight f8, and then bring the knight to g6 and start harassing white on these weak squares like h4 and g4, h4 and f4. And this, I think, actually would be really hard to deal with. If that one of these knights gets to f4, I mean, the diagonal opens up and black's queen looks to get to d5, and it looks really dangerous for white. h5 could be happening soon as well. Also, takes, and then h5 was very reasonable here. And this, I feel like, would have been like my blitz reaction if I just saw this in a blitz game. But over the board, I wasn't quite sure what's happening here. But after g5, I have a different version of the same trick, which I definitely should have considered. That's knight takes b4. So taking this way, grabbing a pawn, and then after bishop takes f3, takes, knight e5, queen takes b7, let's say knight takes d3. This looks really nice for black. We're hitting the bishop. We have a tempo to castle. Eventually we can either play queen d7 before castling or castle and then go queen to d5. The b pawn is of course weak, so black can also just play like knight takes b4 next move, put the knight on d5. And yeah, I think black just has a decisive advantage here. White's king is also just weak for the long run, and yeah, black has a healthier structure, safer king, and so on. So this would have been just like a much simpler way to kind of exploit white's play, or again, this knight f8 maneuver. Pretty much any kind of reasonable move. I also think queen b6 is totally fine, even with ideas like bishop b5, just trading off the light square bishops and using the weaknesses in white's position. So yeah, I got very hung up on this granted thematic idea, which was interesting, but definitely just doesn't cut it. Black had so many better options. Because here what ends up happening is we open up the position, but white has the two bishops. And when I was calculating this, I was mainly considering bishop takes a6, which does end up getting played. But while we were going into this, I realized like bishop e4 in this position actually could be really annoying, where white just keeps the bishop on a very strong diagonal, wants to go bishop to b2, rook to d1 next. And it's not clear if black actually has real play on the king side. Like rook takes h3, for example. White is going bishop b2. There's also, rook to d1 coming. So, and I don't really have any obvious threats, like white's covering h1. And yeah, there doesn't seem to be a mate. And if there's no mate, I could just be busted with white's rooks coming to the center. Eventually, white will pick up this pawn on a6 and then just have these monster passers on the queen side. And yeah, maybe white just parks the bishop on g2 and everything is really safe. So I really wasn't sure about all this. And yeah, I think the engine already likes white quite a bit after bishop e4. Another line I was thinking of is just castles, bishop e2, rook c7, like I can save the material. Let's say takes knight c4, something like this. But yeah, rook d1, bishop d4, white has some very powerful bishops, extra pawn. And yeah, it's not clear at all if I can really take advantage of the king on g1 being weak. So that could have been really dangerous. My opponent did end up going bishop takes a6. And here I was considering a lot of stuff, but I do have to be careful because white does have queen b5 check as a threat, hitting the knight. And then that would force either knight d7, which is very awkward. White starts going rook d1 and putting a lot of pressure. So I didn't really want to allow this. I thought about castling, but then I felt white's going to go bishop e3. So what I end up doing instead is I throw a knight f3 check first. And yeah, I'd already kind of calculated a little bit from afar, but I kept looking and I thought this was kind of the best chance. So white goes king h1, which at first glance looks like it just runs into queen to d6 with a huge mate threat. But here actually white can not just escape, but I think win the game with bishop b5 check, king f8, queen a8 check, bishop to d8, and now very important move, bishop f4. And I tried to make this work a little bit, but of course if I take, then it's mate on d8, and then after e5, white puts a rook on d1, and yeah, it doesn't look great for black at all. We're just playing down a rook here. So I can't go for the immediate queen d6, so I think king h1 was the right move. Had white play king g2 here, then knight h4 check would be quite annoying. We're threatening the h-pawn, and if king h2, I think already queen d6 check is very, very bothersome for white, like f4, rook c2, and yeah, white's king is just getting hunted down here. So king h1, definitely a good find, and I decided to play h5. Probably should have castled. I think castling would have been safer here, but yeah, I felt like I had to play very aggressively in this position because otherwise white's queen side is just gonna win the game for white, so I have to immediately cause threats. And with this move, okay, I'm just trying to open up the rook and open up the h-file, but actually during the game I was very unclear what's happening here. For example, bishop f4, I thought it could get ugly. After hg, rook fd1, if I take on h3 with check, king g2, I don't actually have a mate here. White's king is kind of running away, knight h4 check, king to f1, and h1 is covered. And of course, in the meantime, my queen actually doesn't have any squares in this position. So if this doesn't work out for black, I could just end up losing. White's pieces are very, very active here. So I really wasn't sure during the game. I thought maybe knight d4 here, trying to take this way, but still white has bishop e5, and yeah, this could have ended up, this could have just been terrible. The engine says white is totally winning here, by the way. Obviously, we didn't know that during the game. We don't have the eval bar, but yeah, during the game, all I can say is that it looked super messy, but yeah, after the game, things certainly become clearer. So another option for white was to play g5, and this ends up happening in the game. White could have also thrown in bishop b5 check. One very important line I was looking at was bishop b5 and then g5, and my idea was to take, on bishop takes g5, queen takes g5. There's a line where white can actually pick up the rook in the corner. Queen takes h8. And yeah, I was calculating this one for a while. It's some interesting lines here. I wanted to start with queen f4, just setting up this mate where it looks like, yeah, we could just be winning. But the issue is white has queen e8 check and queen d8 check. And if we step on the g file, there's rook to g1. And then white can give up a rook, but then give up the exchange, but still cover the mate and defend and win with the extra material. And if king e5, there's queen b8 check. If king f5, there's bishop d3. And yeah, long story short, I think I couldn't find more than a draw here for either side, with white having to give perpetual due to this mate. Although maybe actually here white maybe at some point can try. Well, king g2 might be getting mated as well. But the point is that yeah, it didn't seem like this was winning for black. So rather than queen f4 here, I ended up focusing on queen takes b5 in this position. I looked a little bit further because I thought, all right, queen takes g7 seems like the main defense. I would go queen f5. And then this looked very, very tricky for white to handle because we're threatening mates. We want knight h4 as well, or knight g5, opening up the rook. And this looked really, really hard to defend for white. I think the engine gives equality after queen g3, and then either like h4 first or rook d3, rook d3 followed by h4. And yeah, apparently black has enough for the exchange, but not more. But okay, very tricky position. I was willing to play this one and yeah, take my chances here because I thought I thought black should have enough activity. So that was kind of a critical line. The engine points out this move, bishop e3, that I definitely did not consider, but turns out to be very strong. It looks weird at first because black can take, and then fe3, the whole second rank is open, but the point is that the knight is hanging and f7 is hanging as well. And so here it's actually black's king that's getting in big trouble. I can go back with like knight e5 or something to defend, but then rook d1, rook c1, and if white just takes over the c file here, rook c8 comes, that's a huge problem. So this could have just been devastating. So in the game, g5 is played without the check. I took on g5, expecting us to go down this line, bishop b5, king f8, bishop takes g5, queen takes, and then the interesting exchange sack position. But again, yeah, bishop e3 here would be quite strong for white. Or even without bishop b5, bishop e3 in this position. So this was just an idea, yeah, I just didn't consider. I'm not sure if my opponent looked at it either. We talked a little bit after the game, and yeah, we were having a hard time figuring out what white should do. So it was definitely a case of, okay, we thought black is doing well, or it's super unclear, but yeah, this move kind of changes the evaluation of everything. And okay, I should also note that this move, queen d6, still didn't work here, again because of bishop b5, queen a8, bishop d8, and then bishop f4. And yeah, we have to keep this one defended. So after g5 takes, my opponent actually very surprisingly plays bishop b2 here, which caught me very much off guard because I thought queen d6 is just winning on the spot. And yeah, I spent a couple minutes here trying to figure out what was the idea, but I wasn't seeing anything. After queen d6, we're just threatening mates. And now, of course, white doesn't have this huge bishop f4 resource, right? So that's the big difference. If queen somewhere check, or let's say bishop b5 check, king f8, queen a8 check. We don't want to go king e7 because then white gives checks and we can't go to f6 because white will take the rook with check, but black does have bishop d8 here. And yeah, there's no way for white to get out of mate other than to give the queen with queen takes d8 and try to play this position. But it's simply not enough for white, and black just immediately wins with queen to b8, hitting the bishop and, whoops, threatening mate on h2. And so here black just wins too much material. King g2, knight h4 check, for example. King has to move, and then we're taking here. And yeah, black is just having a queen for a rook, and my rook will get out, and yeah, game will be over. So unfortunately for white, after queen d6, there's just no defense. The king is escaping the checks, and yeah, eventually white just has to give the queen, but it's totally lost. So queen a8 check was played. Here I just go back immediately, bishop d8, bishop to b5, and I could go king f8 here and allow white this endgame, which was losing, but I realized in this move order, king e7 is just simpler. And yeah, here my opponent resigned because now there's actually just no way to deal with the threat. He has to play queen takes f3 to give the queen for a knight, but then rook takes f3. I actually did think about this for a little bit because rook fd1 at least threatens some ideas with like rook d7, but it just takes. And okay, I calculated the line all the way until the end just to make sure, but yeah, this is essentially leading to a quick mate. So this was just this was game over. Or if the king goes to d2, then of course we're not worried about any rook d7s anymore. So yeah, after check king e7, that was game over. I was happy to win quickly, but of course objectively this was a very, very messy game and could have gone quite badly. So yeah, I have to kind of think about, really reflect on this moment, because my opponent made a very, very risky and ultimately losing move. And I kind of realized, got the sense that, there should be some punishment here, but reacted absolutely terribly and could have just played much simply here, much more simply. And yeah, hopefully won the game without huge adventures. But okay, that's going to do it. Thanks for watching. 5.5 out of 7 now. 2 rounds left to play. So I'll try to do my best in the last 2 games and hopefully see you in the next videos. Take care.